My husband had an affair with a stewardess during one of his business trips, and when I discovered it, it resulted in a tragic outcome for him. Layla sat alone in the dimly lit living room of their cozy suburban home. The soft glow of the lamp illuminated her tear-streaked face as she held a crumpled piece of paper in her trembling hands. The contents of the letter she had found just hours ago still echoed in her mind. Gabriel, her husband of 12 years, had left for a week-long business trip that morning. She had always trusted him implicitly, never doubting his loyalty or commitment to their marriage. But something had felt off lately, a subtle shift in their connection that she couldn't quite put her finger on. It was a lazy Saturday afternoon when Layla decided to clean out Gabriel's study. She had always admired his dedication to his work, but lately, he had been spending more time locked in there than usual. As she sifted through stacks of paperwork and files, a small, folded piece of paper had fallen from the drawer. Unfolding it with trembling hands, Layla's heart sank as she read the words scrawled in her husband's handwriting. It was a love letter addressed to someone named Rachel, and it spoke of secret rendezvous, passionate moments, and a love that burned brightly despite the darkness of their situation. Her mind reeled as she read and reread the letter, unable to comprehend the depth of Gabriel's betrayal. Tears welled up in her eyes, threatening to spill over. Layla was overcome with a mix of emotions, shock, anger, and an overwhelming sense of betrayal. Unable to contain her anguish any longer, Layla rushed to her bedroom, clutching the letter tightly. She locked the door behind her and collapsed onto the bed, her sobs echoing in the room. It felt like the walls of their once happy home were closing in on her. As the minutes turned into hours, Layla replayed their life together in her mind. She remembered the day they had met in college, their whirlwind romance, and the joy of their wedding day. Gabriel had always been her rock, her confidant, and her love. They had built a life together, with dreams of a future filled with love, laughter, and children. But now, all those dreams lay shattered at her feet, like fragments of glass from a broken mirror. Layla knew she couldn't let this betrayal go unanswered. She had to confront Gabriel about the letter, and she had to do it in person, face to face. The decision weighed heavily on her heart. The man she loved, the man she had shared her life with, had deceived her in the worst possible way. Layla knew that confronting him would be painful, but it was a pain she needed to endure. She couldn't let Gabriel's betrayal define her. She needed answers, closure, and ultimately, a path forward. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Layla wiped away her tears, steeled herself for the difficult conversation ahead, and began to plan her own journey of discovery, one that would lead her to confront her husband during his business trip and ask for a divorce. The days following Layla's discovery of the love letter were a blur of conflicting emotions and sleepless nights. She had spent hours considering her options and how she would confront Gabriel during his business trip. She couldn't bear the thought of waiting for his return to address the painful truth. Finally, the day of his flight arrived. Gabriel had left early in the morning, and Layla had pretended to be supportive of his trip, her acting skills honed to perfection. She waved him off with a forced smile, her heart heavy with the knowledge of the impending confrontation. As the hours ticked by, Layla meticulously planned her own journey. She knew she had to board the same flight as Gabriel to confront him incognito. It was the only way to ensure that he couldn't escape the conversation she so desperately needed to have. With a carefully chosen disguise and a fake identity, Layla made her way to the airport. She had dyed her hair a shade darker, changed her clothing style, and even adopted a pair of prescription glasses to alter her appearance. She had assumed the identity of Emily Reed, a fictional businesswoman on the same flight as Gabriel. Standing in line at the check-in counter, Layla felt a strange mix of determination and fear. She couldn't predict how Gabriel would react to her sudden appearance on his trip, but she was prepared for the worst. She clutched the fake business itinerary she had created for Emily Reed and handed it to the airline agent. With her disguise in place, Layla made her way through security, her heart pounding in her chest. The airport terminal buzzed with the usual activity, travelers rushing to catch their flights, announcements over the intercom, and the aroma of coffee from the nearby cafe. But for Layla, everything seemed surreal, as though she was living in a different world, one she had never imagined she'd be a part of. Boarding time came, and Layla joined the line to enter the aircraft. She held her breath as she approached the gate, praying that she wouldn't be recognized. Her disguise seemed to be holding up, and she was relieved to see no signs of recognition from the airline staff. Once inside the plane, Layla found her seat, which was a few rows behind where Gabriel was sitting. She had strategically chosen a position that would allow her to observe him discreetly throughout the flight. As passengers continued to board, Layla felt a mix of anticipation and anxiety. The aircraft's engines roared to life, and the plane began to taxi down the runway. Layla's heart raced as she realized there was no turning back now. She was on the same flight as her husband, and their confrontation was imminent. She couldn't help but wonder how Gabriel would react when he saw her, and how this journey would change the course of their lives forever. As the plane ascended into the sky, Layla watched Gabriel intently from her seat a few rows behind. He was engrossed in a magazine, seemingly unaware of her presence on the same flight. Layla's heart fluttered with a mix of nervousness and determination. The minutes stretched into what felt like hours, and Layla couldn't wait any longer. She took a deep breath, summoned all her courage, and unbuckled her seatbelt. With each step toward Gabriel, her resolve solidified. She had rehearsed the words she needed to say 1,000 times in her mind. Approaching his row, Layla gently tapped him on the shoulder. Gabriel turned, and his eyes widened in disbelief as he took in the sight of the woman standing before him, a woman he thought was miles away. "Layla?" Gabriel stammered, his voice a mixture of surprise and guilt. Layla nodded, her eyes locked onto his. "We need to talk," she said softly, her tone laced with a combination of sadness and anger. Without waiting for a response, she slid into the empty seat beside him. The flight attendant, a young woman with a friendly smile, approached and asked if she needed anything. Layla politely declined, her focus squarely on the man who had shattered her world. Gabriel shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his gaze darting around nervously. He knew there was no escaping this conversation now. He had been caught in the act, and Layla's presence on the same flight left him with no room to maneuver. Layla began to speak, her voice steady but filled with emotion. She recounted the painful discovery of the love letter, the sleepless nights that had followed, and the emotional turmoil she had endured. Her words hung heavy in the air, and Gabriel listened in silence, unable to meet her eyes. With each passing moment, Layla's anger gave way to sadness. She had loved this man for over a decade, and the revelation of his infidelity had shattered the foundation of trust that had once defined their marriage. As she spoke, tears welled up in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Finally, Layla reached the point she had been building towards since the moment she decided to board the same flight as Gabriel. Her voice trembled as she uttered the words that would change the course of their lives forever. "Gabriel, I can't continue like this. I want a divorce." The gravity of her words hung in the air like a heavy fog. Gabriel's face contorted with a mix of regret and resignation. He had expected a confrontation, but he hadn't anticipated Layla's resolve to end their marriage. For a moment, he searched for words, but none came. The flight continued its journey through the sky, and the tension in the air was palpable. Layla and Gabriel were now two people sitting side by side, but worlds apart. The conversation had begun, and the process of unraveling their shared history had commenced. The mid-air confrontation between Layla and Gabriel had left both of them emotionally drained. As the flight continued on its path, Layla retreated into her thoughts, contemplating the weight of the decision she had just made. She couldn't help but feel a sense of grief for the life they had once shared. Beside her, Gabriel sat in silence, his eyes fixed on the in-flight entertainment screen, but his mind a whirlwind of emotions. Regret, guilt, and a deep sadness engulfed him. He had been confronted with the consequences of his actions in a way he had never anticipated. The passengers around them remained oblivious to the turmoil unfolding in the row just ahead. The flight attendants moved gracefully through the cabin, offering refreshments and attending to the needs of the travelers. It was a stark contrast to the emotional turbulence Layla and Gabriel were experiencing. With a heavy sigh, Layla turned to her husband, breaking the silence that had hung between them. "Gabriel, I need to know why. Why did you do this to us?" "To me?" Her voice quivered with a mix of vulnerability and pain. Gabriel hesitated for a moment, his eyes finally meeting hers. "I don't have any excuses, Layla," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I let our relationship deteriorate, and I made a terrible mistake. Rachel, she was an escape, a distraction from our problems. But it was wrong, and I know it." Layla's heart ached as she listened to his confession. She had known Gabriel for years, and his betrayal was as shocking as it was painful. She had hoped for an explanation, but his words offered little solace. The damage had been done, and their marriage was hanging by a thread. As the flight continued, Layla and Gabriel discussed the logistics of their impending divorce. They agreed that their shared life had become untenable, and it was in both their best interests to part ways. Layla wanted a fresh start, free from the pain of his infidelity, and Gabriel knew he needed to confront his own actions and their consequences. The conversation was filled with a sense of resignation, as if they were both acknowledging the inevitable end of their relationship. Layla couldn't help but feel a sense of sorrow for the years they had invested in their marriage, now reduced to a painful memory. As the hours passed, Layla retreated into her thoughts once more. The revelation of Gabriel's affair had opened wounds that would take time to heal. She knew that the road ahead would be difficult, filled with legal proceedings and emotional challenges, but she was determined to move forward and rebuild her life. Beside her, Gabriel stared out of the airplane window, his thoughts a jumble of remorse and regret. He had lost the woman he had loved for over a decade, and he was left to grapple with the consequences of his actions. The emotional fallout of their mid-air confrontation weighed heavily on both of them, and the plane continued its journey, carrying them further away from the life they had once known. The airplane began its descent toward the destination city, and the captain's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing their imminent arrival. Layla and Gabriel sat in silence, their eyes fixed on the seatbacks in front of them. The mid-air confrontation had left them emotionally drained, and the reality of their impending divorce hung heavily in the air. As the plane taxied to the gate, Layla and Gabriel exchanged a few logistical details about their separation. They agreed that they would seek legal counsel upon their return, a step that neither of them relished but understood was necessary to navigate the complex process of divorce. Once the aircraft came to a complete stop and the seatbelt sign was turned off, Layla and Gabriel stood up in unison. They knew they had to face the world again, and the journey of rebuilding their lives separately had officially begun. The airport terminal buzzed with activity as passengers disembarked, their footsteps echoing against the polished floors. Layla and Gabriel joined the flow of travelers, their steps guided by a shared destination but separate destinies. Their paths diverged at the airport exit. Gabriel, with his carry-on luggage in tow, turned to Layla and spoke softly, "I'm sorry, Layla." It was a heartfelt apology, but Layla could see the weight of his own pain in his eyes. Layla nodded, her emotions still raw, and replied, "I hope you find the happiness you were searching for, Gabriel." With that, she turned away and made her way toward the taxi stand, leaving her soon-to-be ex-husband behind. Over the coming weeks, Layla and Gabriel embarked on the challenging journey of divorce. They each retained legal counsel, navigated the intricacies of dividing their assets, and grappled with the emotional complexities of untangling their lives. The legal battle was emotionally exhausting, but it was a necessary step toward closure and a fresh start. During this time, Layla found solace in her support network of friends and family. Their unwavering encouragement and love provided a lifeline as she navigated the turbulence of her emotions and the demands of the divorce proceedings. She also began attending therapy to help process her feelings and heal from the trauma of her failed marriage. Gabriel, too, sought therapy to confront his actions and understand the root causes of his infidelity. He was determined to grow from the experience and make amends with himself and those he had hurt. Months passed, and the legal battle neared its conclusion. Layla and Gabriel finally signed the divorce papers, their signatures marking the end of a chapter they had once believed would be a lifelong journey together. As the ink dried on the documents, Layla couldn't help but feel a mix of sadness and relief. The pain of her husband's betrayal still lingered, but she knew she had made the right decision for her own well-being. The divorce had been a painful journey, but it was also the beginning of her path toward healing and rediscovering herself. For Gabriel, the divorce had been a sobering wake-up call. He carried the weight of his actions with him, a constant reminder of the consequences of his betrayal. He was committed to learning from his mistakes and rebuilding his life, hopefully finding a way to make amends in the process. Their paths had diverged, and the life they had once shared had come to an end. Layla and Gabriel walked away from their marriage with a mixture of scars and lessons, forever changed by their mid-air confrontation and the painful journey of their divorce.